So my background is in social work and education. So specifically, I was really interested in the macro area of social work and education policy. So that's where I started the intersection, I think, with thinking about children and families systems. And I did school-based social work for a while. That was my first experience in early childhood classrooms. And it became the niche that I just really built from, especially because I was able to see how impactful it can be in those earliest years when children are coming into the understanding of who they are, what they believe. So many concepts are forming, and it's really about the entire system around them. So their caregivers, their teachers, their childcare providers, the environments that they're in. And it just felt like a great place to have an impact and also such a place of hope. I think when things can get really discouraging, when we look at our babies and we think about investing there, it really motivates me to keep going in the work. The first 3 years of our lives are the most rapid period of brain development, and so much of the foundation of how we think and the way that we move through the world is established during that time, even if it isn't in our conscious memory later. And so it's been encouraging to see a movement with more recognition that it's not just about keeping our children safe and alive, but we really need to be investing in how we're nurturing them. And I think that applies to social justice work as well and racial equity work, even though we often don't think of like infants and toddlers and preschoolers as being ready for that kind of engagement. If we're doing it in developmentally relevant ways, it's never too early to start. And that's a big part of my work. I would imagine that my story is not different than many people's in the sense that so much of what motivated me to go down this path and be engaged in this work was my own life experience. So I identify as a Black biracial woman. So I have Western African and Northern European ancestry. But in my growing up, as is quite common in this United States context, I was just with my mom's side of the family for the majority of the time, and especially those early formational years, which was white. That side that was engaged in just so much of dominant culture and the norms when it comes to Euro-American backgrounds. And so in coming of age and just going through my own developmental processes, a lot of my looking back and reflecting, I just saw major gaps in my own identity development and formation. And I saw places where I wish that my caregivers had been more intentional in terms of socialization. I was never at a lack when it came to love. There was a lot of love in my family and a lot of good care. But I think it's an important piece to realize that to be holistic in the way that we're preparing our children and that we are helping them to learn to love themselves, the ethnic racial identity piece needs to be included. And my perspective, even though for me it was really important and necessary and often missing when it came to the African American side, the Black American side of my family being a part of my formation. But I think it's really important for all of our children, including white children, to be connected to these socialization conversations. And we as adults need to be intentional with that. If you're just left up to society, you're usually going to end up in a place that has just a lot of dysfunction and not inclusive mindsets. And that's something that I want to impact and disrupt. So if you think about yourself as an adult engaging in this work with a child, you got to first have done some of your own work of your own personal ethnic racial identity. And oftentimes in the United States context can be tricky. For African Americans, when you think about where's the roots that I come from, what place on the continent, what tribe, like that is something that was stolen from us. But also, unfortunately, in the US context, it's been erased for so many white families as well. When they think about whiteness as a construct has also erased identity roots for other cultures as well and other people from other backgrounds. So that's something that's the number one thing, like grappling with that, thinking about how did you come to understand your own racial background and ethnic heritage, and maybe how have you not, and like doing work. And then there is more of a systemic awareness. And this is particular to the United States context. So it's really about recognizing how race and ethnicity impact our social systems in the US. You have to be able to acknowledge that if you're going to do this work from a justice perspective, and knowing that it does impact outcomes, even though it's a construct, even though it's something that we would say is not right. Having an acknowledgement. You can't just be head in the sand, just like it's just the human race. Like you have to be able to acknowledge that. And then you also have to be accountable to ongoing learning. There's not an end to this journey. And we've seen it with language change, or just as stuff continues to evolve and we have new sociocultural contexts that are coming into play, it has to be this ongoing journey of learning. If you're going to be in a place where you have beliefs about ethnic racial identity that allow you to socialize children with this justice lens, you have to have a sense of it personally, systemically, and an accountability to ongoing learning. Sometimes I've had teachers say, like, my class is all white, so I don't really okay. And even if you are working in a homogenous setting, that can't be an excuse. We still have to be doing this work. It doesn't matter if it's a Black child or a white child or a child that has like Latine background, any child in this country, there does need to be intentional affirmation of Blackness, because it is so just embedded in the very foundations of our context as the United States to be anti-Black. And so that's for Black children in terms of pushing back against that internalized racism, but for all children, because without intentionally affirming Blackness, that is not the message that they'll receive. Even in the most kind of liberal, we're going to go to the protests, we're going to do whatever, it has to be explicit. I have the research, I've done the studies, I've developed the measures, and now I want to curate it in a way that it's really accessible, it can be understood, and there can be tools and resources for those who are interested and ready to just start to come along on this journey and set our children up to be inclusive in the way that they're thinking and very positive and healthy in the way that they're reflecting on who they are.
This is Social Justice Origin Stories. I'm your host, Rolando Thompkins-Jones. Social Justice Origin Stories is a storytelling project that highlights personal stories and defining moments that have inspired individuals and organizations to labor for equity and social justice. Through truth-telling, the honest sharing of their experiences, storytellers teach us about themselves, enabling us to learn about ourselves and our world through their stories. By reconnecting with pivotal moments of activation in their lives, they invite us to do the same. At Social Justice Origin Stories, we believe that there's power in storytelling, and lived experience is experience. There's room enough for all of us to do this work. There are many ways to contribute, and our contributions don't need to be the same. We can enter and remain engaged in the work using the gifts that are special to us while supporting others and using theirs. We have the capacity to grow and change for the better when exposed to new information and experiences. We believe in our inherent worth and capabilities, and we possess the power to inspire and create change within ourselves and others. We can transcend the confines of the status quo to imagine and design more equitable and humanizing systems. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate you sharing your time and choosing to listen to Social Justice Origin Stories today. Today, we are joined by Anissa L. I would say Dr. Anissa L. at this stage. So thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on completing your doctorate, doing work that the world needs, that we need. No, it was no easy feat. And so really appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom with us. I have to say, it's been a real pleasure doing this project because I'm getting to connect with and reconnect with a lot of folks. I was talking about this recently, a lot of folks who I connected with when I was out in the Grand Rapids area, building relationships, doing some social justice work myself, and a lot of full circle moments. Now, you'll have to, at least from my memory, I feel like I first met you through it was a National Equity Project cohort thing. I don't know if you remember that. It was a long time ago.
Yes.
Okay, it was a National Equity Project thing, and it was so great to meet you and participate in that program. You had already been there, been making an impact. So even before I was there, I know you were making an impact out there in the Grand Rapids area, but then also you've continued to be a powerful force and advocate for equity and social justice and racial justice, investing in the emotional health, the physical health, the overall well-being of our children. And I know you've dedicated much of your life and time to making sure the kids come
Our
out
babies.
okay. Our babies, that they're all right. And just a lot of full circle moments. And I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. As you said, Dr. Anissa L. And I am in the Grand Rapids area. That's where I'm based in West Michigan. And I've lived in the greater Grand Rapids area most of my life. Some ventures out here and there, but this is where my family is rooted. I have an amazing partner, Jamel Eddy, and we are raising 3 sons. We have 2 teenagers now, which is wild, and then a 9-year-old coming up right behind them. So my background is in social work and education. So specifically, I was really interested in the macro area of social work and education policy. So that's where I started the intersection, I think, with thinking about children and families, systems. And I did school-based social work for a while. That was my first experience in early childhood classrooms. And it became the niche that I just really built from, especially because I was able to see how impactful it can be in those earliest years when children are coming into the understanding of who they are, what they believe. So many concepts are forming, and it's really about the entire system around them. So their caregivers, their teachers, their childcare providers, the environments that they're in. And it just felt like a great place to have an impact and also such a place of hope. I think when things can get really discouraging, when we look at our babies and we think about investing there, it really motivates me to keep going in the work.
And yeah, it really is a special time. I don't know if this is true for your experience or folks who are out there listening, but those early childhood years, I have teachers and educators and folks in my early childhood who I still remember, first and last name, still remember different experiences and lessons that they taught me and just ways being supported. And so this is such a critical time and important work to invest in the well-being of our children. Thank you.
Definitely. And I would
Thank
even
you
say what
again.
you don't remember is
Yeah.
impactful. The first 3 years of our lives are the most rapid period of brain development, and so much of the foundation of how we think and the way that we move through the world is established during that time, even if it isn't in our conscious memory later. And so it's been encouraging to see a movement with more recognition that it's not just about keeping our children safe and alive, but we really need to be investing in how we're nurturing them. And I think that applies to social justice work as well and racial equity work, even though we often don't think of like infants and toddlers and preschoolers as being ready for that kind of engagement. If we're doing it in developmentally relevant ways, it's never too early to start. And that's a big part of my work.
It's never too early to start. So you're here to share with us about ethnic racial identity development and socialization in early childhood, and particularly focusing on that as a way to promote radical self-love and disrupt the development of harmful bias. I've talked with other guests too, particularly internalized oppression and
Yeah.
those sorts of things. And excited to talk to you about that. But I'm also wondering, what are some of the things that led you to focus in on this topic as an area of not only study, but an area where you can really do some activism and really do some good social justice work?
I would imagine that my story is not different than many people's in the sense that so much of what motivated me to go down this path and be engaged in this work was my own life experience. So I identify as a Black biracial woman. So I have Western African and Northern European ancestry. But in my growing up, as is quite common in this United States context, I was just with my mom's side of the family for the majority of the time, and especially those early formational years, which was white. That side that was engaged in just so much of dominant culture and the norms when it comes to Euro American backgrounds. And so in coming of age and just going through my own developmental processes, a lot of my looking back and reflecting, I just saw major gaps in my own identity development and formation. And I saw places where I wished that my caregivers had been more intentional in terms of socialization. I was never at a lack when it came to love. There was a lot of love in my family and a lot of good care. But I think it's an important piece to realize that to be holistic in the way that we're preparing our children and that we are helping them to learn to love themselves, the ethnic racial identity piece needs to be included. And my perspective, even though for me it was really important and necessary and often missing when it came to the African American side, the Black American side of my family being a part of my formation. But I think it's really important for all of our children, including white children, to be connected to these socialization conversations. And we as adults need to be intentional with that. So a lot of the origin for me was looking back and realizing things that I didn't get that I think would have been really valuable, and then wanting to look into that more, understand it, and contribute to tools and resources to help others engage with their children in ways that would be meaningful.
Now, when you talked earlier, you said, and I'm trying to recall back exactly what the phrasing was, but it really resonated with me. So I shared about, oh yeah, I can still remember some of my early childhood
Yeah,
experiences and the
yeah,
people I know by name, and it resonated so much with me. You also said, I could also it's about the things that we can't remember either, that
Mhm,
we may not be able to
mhm.
recall. But those areas are very important too, that we're very intentional about reflecting on the impact of that. And so, could you say a
Absolutely.
little bit more about the significance of that? Like, it's about the stuff, yeah, sure, the stuff we can remember, but then also the stuff that we might not necessarily remember, but was still happening around us. Yeah.
Yeah, when you think about it, so babies are born, and it's actually there's just so much miraculous, uh, aspects of even in utero. There's studies that show there's different ability to detect accent variation and things like that. Even as a baby is developing, there's so much more going on and so much more capacity than we often think about. And as early as 3 months of age, you're starting to see an ability to recognize what's familiar, even when it comes to phenotypic features. So, skin color, facial features, hair texture. There's more curiosity that we see around like that 6 month mark where you're drawn to what's not familiar, just trying to make sense of it. And then as you're getting into those toddler years, you're starting to have language. It's so natural and developmentally appropriate that children are taking in information through their senses and then they're trying to categorize it. What does it mean? Is this safe? Is this good? I'm curious about it. And they're looking to those around them, the adult in their environment, to decide. And so much of that's just, if you think about like evolutionary, it's about survival. And you had to stick with your tribe.
Mhm.
And if it was different, it was often dangerous. But there's so much of that's innate in us that if it's not disrupted, even though it's so normal and actually really healthy for children to be drawn to what's familiar and to know, okay, this person looks like my person who I know is a safe person, but it can be that initial seed of bias before we even really realize it. If you think about language development and just even when a child is learning words like family or friend, what are the images that are associated with that? If they only see same race pictures or same race people, it's hard for their minds to expand those categories to include more diversity. And unfortunately, even in the preschool years, 3 and 4, we start to see race based bias that's evident. It's things like associating adjectives, so like pretty or good or nice. And you can start to see that being more of a white preference. Or things like even you think about the classic doll studies with Dr. Clark, where it was like seeing how
Mhm.
children were even that young, internalizing what was desirable. And those are the kinds of things that you don't, it's not that someone was telling you, this is what's good, this is what's bad, these are the people we like, these are the people we don't, but it's being absorbed in all of that time. And then when we get to a place later where we're just like, I don't know, I don't like their vibe, or I don't think I'd want to know that person or get in a relationship with them. Those things are just, there's building over time from our earliest months and years. And without intentional engagement, if you're just left up to society, you're usually going to end up in a place that has just a lot of dysfunction and not inclusive mindsets. And that's something that I want to impact and disrupt.
Yeah, if it's just left up to society, if
Right.
there's no intervention, things go the way. They tend to go the way of the dominant identities and dominant power that's theirs. Yeah, when you said that, even down when it comes to references and word associations and those sorts of things, like, yeah, I've seen some of that, like on some of those worksheets. It's
Yeah.
like, and at early childhood age, like pretty or sad or angry. And sometimes I noticed and have even I'm talking personal experience, but then
Mhm,
also working
mhm.
with educators myself have noticed like some of those things, it's like angry or mad, or some of the ones that we would associate
Right.
with difficulty are sometimes associated with folks of color in the imagery there.
Mm.
And yeah, I appreciate how you described that, how you talked about that. Yeah. If left alone, if no intervention, it's going to be confusing. And it's also going to continue to perpetuate
Right.
a lot of the inequity that exists now. Let's talk more about some of those interventions. What types of interventions
Yeah.
are available to folks, or just things that you think also are really important for us to remember and know about racial identity development and socialization?
Definitely. So just to go back to in terms of your question around my own motivation,
Yeah.
it's so interesting when you reflect back on childhood, you only know what you know. And so it's very normalized. And often it's in our ongoing development and maturation that we can look back and just be like, wait a minute, you know, that was a little different. Or wow, I never even would have really thought about that. So for me, it's interesting just in terms of even these classic doll studies. I actually do have very specific doll examples in my own upbringing.
Mhm.
So it there was definitely, I didn't sense it so much explicitly as a child, but there was definitely a discomfort and I would even say a disappointment from my maternal side of the family that my mom had a child with a Black man. It was just something that was not expected. There was definitely racism embedded, even if it wouldn't have been called that at the time.
Yeah.
And this is to me one of the things that's so powerful because it's not that anyone ever sat me down and told me Black people are bad or being Black is not as desirable. Having brown skin and textured hair is not good. But even without that very direct messaging, I certainly absorbed it. And I remember one of the stories that I sometimes tell, my maternal grandmother, who was white, she had this little kind of rite of passage where at the time Cabbage Patch dolls were like a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
And she would get her granddaughters a Cabbage Patch doll. I think it was like for our 8th birthday. So it was always a big deal. Like I'd seen my cousin get hers. And so I knew as I was approaching this birthday, that would be something that I would be able to enjoy as well. And I remember one day my mom telling me, she won't get you a Black Cabbage Patch. And it was without hesitation or without thought. I was just like, oh yeah, I know. I knew that was like, I would definitely be picking a white Cabbage Patch. And if you would have asked me what I would have preferred, I think I would have chosen that. But it was also understood. And I did. I got that Cabbage Patch. It was a beloved Cabbage Patch. Similarly, my sister and I have a younger sister, Barbies. That was like our huge thing. We loved to play Barbies. All our Barbies were white. So even when you mentally, how we are playing out family scenarios and what does it look like for the kids, the Barbie kids and the adults and all these things. One of the biggest fights we ever had in childhood, we eventually, somehow we had a Black Ken doll. I don't even know who got us that Black Ken or where he came from. But I, being the older sister, I'm not proud of it, but I manipulated my sister into some sort of a trade for this. And she had a white Ken doll, I had a Black Ken doll, and she traded me. We did have a rule because as siblings, you're probably getting into it a little bit, even with yours, where it's just
They're starting to see the sibling dynamics.
Like you gotta,
Yeah.
And so I convinced her to trade me so that I got the white Ken doll. And then she was upset and she wanted to trade back, and I was like, nope, too late. And my mom stood on that, and it's the first time I remember her being just so mad at me. Just started destroying things in our room. And when I think about, wow, because of how much she didn't want that Black Ken doll and even my motivation to try to get rid of it, this is the kind of thing that I also just wish so much that my mom would have picked up on and wasn't discussed, but it's just getting so internally embedded as far as just like the value. And these are dolls, but we're both brown skinned girls with little afro hair. And you can't separate how that was also the way that we were viewing ourselves. And that's the place where I think really motivated me of what if my mom would have had more awareness? What if my grandmother would have had more awareness? There may have been much less work I would have had to do later in thinking about my identity in a really positive way and feeling connected to it with cultural pride and all of those kinds of aspects.
Yeah, so really speaking to how the racism, how the white supremacy is really just baked in to so many things in those early experiences. I'm thinking of the trading the dolls and just the toys that are available or were available. And it's just speaking to how powerful even having representations in play and books and media we consume, other things, is so important. Because I'm listening to your experience and our experiences have their differences in that way. But I'm also, as I was listening to you say that, and I was like, you know what? And they didn't have stuff like Gracie's Corner when we were coming up. Or I'm just throwing out some of the things in my mind.
There was no,
there was no Miles Morales.
Yeah.
No. So you picked up on it. It was few and far in between in a lot of instances. And so without that like intentional cultivation and intervention, that's one of the things that's resonating about the work that you're doing and what you're sharing with me today is, we have to be intentional about this. What were some of the things for you that represented or served as catalysts that brought you deeper into awareness of this? So there was a point in time where you're like, I'm trying to trade this Ken doll, but what were some of the things for you that you can recall that represented, I don't want to say turning a corner, but an increasing of awareness to where, oh, you know what? I wouldn't do that. Now I'm leaning into this information.
Yeah.
Now I'm seeking this out, or I'm trying to learn more about myself.
I thought I married a Black Ken doll. It's full circle for real. That's honestly for me. And I hold some grief around this because when I think about my entire childhood and adolescence, really, the awareness and realization and then some of that unlearning journey, it really wasn't until college. So it's just, that is a lot of time and really pivotal time. I remember I was just thinking about it this morning and preparing for this podcast. the other piece that was unique in my own personal journey, I was homeschooled for 6 years. So not only was it that my family was white, like I didn't go to school. So like that also from fourth through ninth grade. So just like very, very pivotal times to not have some of the natural exposure or be exposed to just different children in different families and all these things that can help you to just have a different sense when it comes to stereotypes or things. So much of that can be disrupted in relationship or just experiences. And that was limited for me as well, just because of the nature of homeschooling. But then I did go back to school to a small charter school when I was in 10th grade, where I did eventually graduate. It was a brand new charter school. So to homeschooling, to this like little micro school. But she was looking at the photo and she was like, oh, wow, you were the only Black person in your graduating class of 33, mind you. But I remember snatching the photo from her and being like, I was? Like it was that outside of my awareness in terms of that identity piece. And there's some positives of that. I was like, these were just like my friends and my people. But it was just like, wow. But subconsciously, the messaging was so strong. And the first thing that I think really shook me out of it, and it's something I just have such high value and esteem for, was a pre-college program that I went to after my 11th grade year. This was actually at Calvin University. It's called the Entrada Scholars Program. And it was designed for North American, at the time they said ethnic minority, not a term I like to use because global majority and all of that. But it was
That's right.
to really bring in students who might not otherwise have that natural trajectory of their path and understand college. And I think it was Calvin's attempt to try to diversify some of the student body. It's like very white, Dutch, Christian Reformed. And so students would come and stay on campus for a month, take an actual college class, get a lot of coaching and support. But there were students from all over the country, so many different ethnic backgrounds, so many different racial backgrounds. Like it was mind-blowing for me, having grown up in this white family, having multiple years of being homeschooled, and all of a sudden being in this like globally enriched community for a whole month. And a lot of what they did in their programming was talking about our culture and our backgrounds and helping to just illuminate that amongst us as like 16, 17-year-olds. And it was really a time where I think one of the first times where I really did start to feel a pride. And the fact that my belonging and even my invitation to this program was because I was Black biracial, that was the asset that allowed me to experience this. And then just hearing these stories, meeting these people, learning about all these things and seeing the pride was transformative for me. And then I think that really was a catalyst as I went into college, like right away. I did end up going to Calvin University, which is, I laugh because that's not the place you go and discover you're Black. Many ways, because you go and stick out. But as far as like really cultivating a deep sense of Black identity, that happened for me at Calvin, mostly because it was just such an eye-opening experience. I had a roommate who's first generation Haitian who I met in that Entrada program, and we were roommates all 4 years at Calvin. She was from Boston. Just such a different kind of life experience. That was my ride or die that whole time. I got involved in multicultural student development. This is where some of the advocacy, so much of the learning. I did my first session of healing racism, like as a college student. And that's when so much of this stuff was coming back to me about my childhood, about where I was unearthing some of these thoughts that I had for myself, but also starting to question them and starting to come into a better sense of my identity. And then thinking about how do I help this be something that can happen so much earlier for other children and young people. Yeah. So that was when it first started to full circle for me.
That's a good lead in, because I was going to ask you, how do those experiences inform your work, your research, and how you are dedicating your life and time now? Could you talk a little bit more about like how that transformational experience you had then feeds into the passion behind how you're showing up today?
Yeah, I majored in social work and like I said, was more in that macro policy space. I spent my last semester of undergrad in DC. I went on to get my MSW at University of Michigan and focused on community organizing, policy and social systems. So what was awakened in me about not only racial justice, but social justice more broadly, the social work field, macro social work, thinking about policy and systems, it just started to become more and more who I was. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram, but I'm a 1 on the Enneagram, which is like the advocate, the reformer. And sometimes I do
Okay.
have to pull it back because it can get a little unhealthy when you just take on everything of the world. But it was just like, okay, that's not okay. I am called to now bring the justice. And so finding my lane in that has been a journey. But my work was starting to it was focused on systems and policy, and then it became more and more honed, I think, to early childhood. But this piece in the back of my mind was always nagging of, I still really have this draw to this ethnic racial identity development and socialization for the purposes like you talked about, the radical self-love, the disruption of bias, things that I wish would have happened for me. And I never could quite figure out how to completely embed that into my career. And so the opportunity that happened, Chris Arnold actually was the person who came to me with this, but she was interim director for the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance. So this was a group based on the Lakeshore, and they had a curriculum series called Talking to Kids About Race. And it was designed mostly for educators, but I think parents could be involved too, to just give some general introduction of here's how you might engage in these conversations with young children. Wasn't quite aimed as young as like infants and toddlers, but they had this like a workbook, and then they had a presentation that was more of a one-off where it was a professional development kind of thing. And Chris had come to me and just said, hey, it was developed quite a while ago. We'd really like to update it. I'm not even sure how she knew this was like a passion area of mine, but she asked, would you be interested in helping us? And I was like, absolutely. And that honestly was the seed for me to just be like, I want to go as deep as I can in this. And as I continued to talk to people about it, it was just like, it sounds like you need to get a PhD. Like that will give you the space, the time, the runway to get the research, to understand the theory, to think about the development. My PhD is in child development. And eventually that was the pursuit that I went on. And I just curated my entire program to gaining a content expertise in this, not just about my own personal lived experience, but in a theoretical and research-based way. And then my dissertation, I developed 2 measures. They're designed for caregivers of toddlers to be able to take this questionnaire and then understand where you are in terms of your capacity to engage in ethnic racial identity development, socialization processes from a justice perspective. And anywhere you might have low capacity, the next step that I want to do is be like, okay, and here's the tools, here's the resources, here's the trainings, here's the invitations that can increase that capacity.
And what are some of the things that you've been finding with that study or with the questionnaire, and how folks have been responding to it, or any themes, any patterns that are emerging?
Yeah. Well,
That?
it was so exciting because you can talk about it. And a lot of people might say, yeah, it makes sense. Or after some conversation, I can see how that's important. But to really operationalize it, that's the piece that can get really sticky. And so what I did in terms of my research, I took multiple measures that were for either adults or teenagers or older children, and I adapted them thinking about this early childhood period, infants and toddlers specifically. And then I did a factor analysis, which basically uncovers what are the questions on this survey that group together in a thematic way. And for me, it was so exciting because 8 themes emerged. There was 3 more on the beliefs side, and then there was 5 on the practices side. So instead of just talking about this conceptually and as something that feels really abstract, it's like, here are 8 things, 8 specific things that this research is showing makes a difference. So on the belief side, the 3 factors that came out were, first of all, a personal ethnic racial identity awareness. So if you think about yourself as an adult engaging in this work with a child, you got to first have done some of your own work. You have to be of your own personal ethnic racial identity. And oftentimes in the United States context can be tricky. For African Americans, when you think about where's the roots that I come from, what place on the continent, what tribe, like that is something that was stolen from us. But also, unfortunately, in the US context, it's been erased for so many white families as well. When they think about whiteness as a construct has also erased identity roots for other cultures as well, and other people from other backgrounds. So that's something that's the number one thing, like grappling with that, thinking about how did you come to understand your own racial background and ethnic heritage, and maybe how have you not, and like doing work. So that's the first one, personal. And then there is more of a systemic awareness. And this is particular to the United States context. So it's really about recognizing how race and ethnicity impact our social systems in the US. You have to be able to acknowledge that if you're going to do this work from a justice perspective, and knowing that it does impact outcomes, even though it's a construct, even though it's something that we would say is not right. having an acknowledgement. You can't just be head in the sand, just like it's just the human race. Like you have to be able to acknowledge that. And then you also have to think that you have to be accountable to ongoing learning. There's not an end to this journey. And we've seen it with language change, or just as stuff continues to evolve and we have new socioeconomic contexts that are sociocultural contexts that are coming into play. It has to be this ongoing journey of learning. So those are the things on the belief side. If you're going to be in a place where you have beliefs about ethnic racial identity that allow you to socialize children with this justice lens, you have to have a sense of it personally, systemically, and an accountability to ongoing learning. And those are things that I really want to create modules around and help people even go deeper in each one of those. And then the practices ones, I think these are even that a little bit more accessible for folks, and just it feels exciting to give people things where they're like, oh, I could do that. I actually do see a path forward. And the first one, you were starting to allude to it already, is this color conscious exposure. Just like we were back in the day, that was harder to do because there just wasn't this at this point in this amount of time. You don't have to put a lot of effort. Like the books, the cartoons, the music, the museums, the play groups, there's so much where you can, the festivals, all these different things where you can help your child from a very young age be exposed, their mental capacity expanded. One of the things that's interesting that came out in my research too, there's this phenomena called perceptual narrowing in child development. And it's like you're born with all this potential in your brain, but really based on what you're exposed to, very naturally, your brain kind of prunes away what's not needed, what's not used. That's why it's so much harder for us to learn other languages as adults. But for children, they have this capacity of so much potential. But then when saying you're English only, you're only exposed to English, your brain starts to slowly like prune away these synapses that would allow for lots of other language content to come in. And so it's so much harder to build that back. And so you can think about even, we see it oftentimes and think about it as, oh, wow, that's so racist. This idea of, say, other race individuals, like they all look alike, right? All Black people look alike, all Asian people look alike, all white people look alike. Even though that is problematic, there really is a brain development component of that. If you were only exposed to one or two ethnic racial groups as a child, your brain loses capacity to differentiate faces in a racial group that you did not have a lot of exposure to. But you can see if you do intentionally have exposure early, you're literally changing the way that the brain is able to take and see the individuality in other racial features. And the color conscious piece is where you have to acknowledge it. So it's not just, oh, well, that's just a friend, we're all friends. It's no, like there are differences and we can talk about it. And we can talk about it separate from like a moral way or what's better. But we don't have to say, we don't see color unless you have a visual impairment. Like that's not really reality on color conscious exposure. And then discussion of physical features. So that can be so uncomfortable for parents, but it's like giving them the language instead of saying, you can obviously talk about like hair color or something, but you can talk about texture, but kinky hair, curly hair and stuff, not nappy hair, but still that we are talking about it. We're acknowledging it. Oh, you're noticing that she looks different than you. Those spots are called freckles. Like just that you're just talking about it. Anytime that you just hush a child, if they make an observation about something that they're observing, you're automatically sending that message of, oh, that's bad. It's just, oh, why does he look so weird? You're like, oh, we don't say that. Instead of being like, you're noticing something's different. We need to discuss these physical features because otherwise it's, whoa, he must be really bad because I couldn't even ask a question about something I saw. That's number two, just the physical features. And then cultivation of empathy, which I think we all want for our kids, but it really helps to set the seeds of, or plant those initial seeds of being open to a different experience and being able to connect that to common feelings, whether it's like unfairness or just this whole idea of it's not just about it's good for you, you're doing fine, but having this empathy. So when you do see later on these systemic issues where it's just, wow, I actually feel bought into that as well in terms of having a responsibility to disrupt it. The last two, I'm going to save the one for last because it really surprised me in the research, but the other one was this idea of curation of window and mirror environments. This idea where for children, you want to have them be able to see like outside, they need to see windows to other experiences that are different from them, to have that exposure and to have that understanding, but they also need to see mirrors. And so when you think about your individual child, it's going to be based on who that child is. So where are you making sure they're seeing themselves? This is really important for like teachers in the classroom, looking at these children that are under your care and that you're guiding and teaching, and making sure every single child sees themselves represented in the materials, in the content, things like that, but also that they're seeing representation of what's different than them. Sometimes I've had teachers say, like, my class is all white, so I don't really like, okay. And even if you are working in a homogenous setting, what are you doing to still help create those windows? And that can't be an excuse. We still have to be doing this work. And the last one, which at first I was surprised, but then thinking about it, I was like, no, because this is the United States. It totally makes sense. It was affirmation of Blackness. And this, to me, though, it really made sense because it doesn't matter if it's a Black child or a white child or a child that has like Latina background, any child in this country, there does need to be intentional affirmation of Blackness because it is so just embedded in the very foundations of our context as the United States to be anti-Black. And so yes, for Black children in terms of pushing back against that internalized racism, but for all children, because without intentionally affirming Blackness, that is not the message that they'll receive. Even in the most kind of liberal, we're going to go to the protests, we're going to do whatever, it has to be explicit. And that came out strong. So those are 5 practices. And there's so much to unpack within them, which to me feels like the next steps in this work. I have the research, I've done the studies, I've developed the measures, and now I want to curate it in a way that it's really accessible, it can be understood, and there can be tools and resources for those who are interested and ready to just start to come along on this journey and set our children up to be inclusive in the way that they're thinking and very positive and healthy in the way that they're reflecting on who they are.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I know that's long, but I had to
Yeah, and very intentional. And I'm seeing the common thread with this is an educational segment for folks who are listening, social justice origin stories, but we always go back to what are some of the things that motivated us to pursue the different areas where we're making our contributions. And I'm just seeing the common thread. Hey, I'm having these experiences. There's some things that I wish that I had. And then you're going about, and then having experiences where you have some of those gaps addressed, and then you're going about, okay, wait a minute, but how can we support folks in getting to this place or having these affirming experiences sooner, right? These educational affirming experiences sooner. And then you're going out, you're doing the research, you're studying, you're seeing, and you're naming not just the belief systems that are important to be aware of, but then also what I loved about it, also the very practical steps, very practical things, actions that we can take in trying to be better about this. We have to be affirming of Blackness. This is such an important message. And then also, we still have to acknowledge those differences. So this is just an aside, but it's like a confirmation. I'm going to put something into addressing that idea further, either here or some other platform. But I just recently talking to some other professional folks across social media, and one of the things that was coming up is, hey, we need to outgrow race. We need to can we do this without acknowledging the race and racism? We're all the human race kind of thing you brought up. I loved how you also said or you wrote in terms of preparation for this, it's like ethnic racial identity development is a universal developmental process. So it's not just something that Black people experience, everybody experiences this thing. And so whether we are acknowledging that or not, but the lack of acknowledgement, I think, is one of the big pieces that continues to keep us stuck in this. And so I really appreciate you just naming, among all other things, but it's like, hey, it's going to be hard to do this work if we cannot acknowledge racism exists, the impact of that, if we can't be conscious about that and the steps that we're taking. I just
and if there is a pathway
if
there is a pathway to a different future, this is still where it has to start. So much of the work, this work was rooted in very specifically the African American experience. So even thinking about the Dr. Clark work and the Doll study and things like that was about Black children. So much of the initial work on racial identity development was exclusive about thinking about Black children. And there's these tenets of it that talk about things like preparation for bias. And I have 3 Black sons. I understand the importance of that. Another tenet in racial socialization when it came to African American children was promotion of mistrust. This is about safety. There's also positive things like cultural pride was one of them, egalitarianism. But I've had a little bit of pushback from some of the more senior scholars in the field that came up in this racial socialization focus that was very much about separating what are we doing for Black children. And I do see the value in that. But at the same time, one of the things that I'll say back is I'm engaging in that. I am preparing my children for bias, and I am in curated ways helping to have them at least aware of where they may need to exhibit mistrust. But I don't want that to just be generation after generation the main things that we're bringing to our Black children. What does it look like in a world that promotion of mistrust doesn't have to be one of the main things in our parenting? And I do think that you first have to acknowledge it. We have to start here. So for the folks that are like, oh, but when will we get past race? Like, it's not tomorrow. And if it ever is going to happen in a different, it will not happen from just like jumping over this reality right now. Or, so I think, and the other thing too, that you said about this universal nature, when people are just like, oh, I don't want to plant this in the children, or I hear a lot from white parents, I don't want my child to feel bad about themselves or feel shame. So it's okay, we just are not going to do it and it'll be fine. But socialization happens in silence as well. And so there has to be intentionality. One of the things that came out of my research too is this idea of healthy ethnic racial identity development. So I took out the word positive. Yes, there's positive aspects, but some of that it's positional and it depends on your situatedness. So for white families in particular in the US context, a healthy ethnic racial identity is going to have an awareness that like whiteness is not just who you are, right? There is some sort of cultural background. There is some sort of heritage that is not just in this construct, but also because whiteness is real and not your fault, not your idea, you were born into it. There's a responsibility that's unique for you in dismantling racism that might look a little different from your friend with brown skin. That's the end goal for all of us, but how we come at it is going to be different. And we can have a healthy sense of identity regardless of who we are. It doesn't have to be shame-based. It doesn't have to be about feeling bad about yourself, but there has to be an acknowledgement. And then there has to be, I think, a commitment to, based on who I am, who my family is, what my background is, how am I helping my child to come into their own role when it comes to this bigger, broader.
Yeah, appreciate that context. I also think about sometimes too, it's like, all right, so what about the Black kids then? What about how Black kids are feeling about their educational experience, lack of representation, and so many things. So I appreciate you sharing that. Wow, so many things. But I was saying all that to say, I see the thread in your storytelling. It's like, all right,
yeah,
those are experiences, and this is how you're going about making your contributions, making your way. And as you said, it's connected in your personal experience, but also it's grounded in study and theory and research and those things. It's just so important. There was another thing I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
I'm a big fan and supporter of public media, big fan and supporter of networks like PBS, came up on programs like Sesame Street. There's many. And I thought I saw something. And even that, Mr. Roger, even that, right?
Yes.
I'm here as I'm getting older and learning a little bit more because I'm just remembering being a kid and just taking the information in. But as I understand it, there's also a very intentional history behind the creation of programs like Sesame Street that were rooted in racial equity and racial justice and recognizing disparities that exist. I'm just saying all that to say, I thought I saw something that you posted recently at the time of this recording around doing something for a program. It was similar,
you
perhaps.
did.
It's not
You
Sesame
did
Street,
see something.
but it's similar. And I was like, that is so incredible. I just really want to hear about that.
I can totally share.
To talk about this initiative, y'all, because I'm really big on, and some of it was I loved it when I was younger, but then also getting into parenting myself and then just thinking back over the course of life and things being significant, just really seeing the power of early childhood education and programming.
Yes.
And so I saw that and I was like, wow. And I knew you had done the book that you talked about, but I saw that too. And I just said, wow, isn't this just an incredible just manifestation of just care and purpose that you have for the kids? Yeah. If you would just explain about this, 'cause I don't remember quite the name of it, but I remember seeing it and I was like, I would love to talk to you about it.
Yeah. And I love that you said that too, because this is something that I didn't think about, but it became more and more clear throughout my program when I was starting to look at where do some of these early messages come in and what tools already exist that caregivers trust or they look to, whether it's educators, families, guardians, things like that. And exactly like PBS, Sesame Street, I did a full semester study on Sesame Street and it was so groundbreaking for the time and it was so intentional. Even the fact that of like the neighborhood setting and Black and white children, especially at that time, being together, it was banned in some states initially because they were like, we're not ready for our constituents to see literally Black and white children like on screen together in relationship. There's similar things with Mr. Rogers too, as far as just like what was happening in those programming spaces to push back and move us forward in terms of integration and things like that. But as I was looking into that, the other piece that was really powerful for me in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, Sesame Street really expanded their social justice content. And they specifically started to do some work around racial justice. But they introduced this concept of what does it mean to be an upstander. And they did a partnership with CNN where they did this summit and were helping children to understand what is a protest. They introduced some new puppets. Like, it was just really cool to see. And it made me think, okay, this could be a vehicle for some of the research that I'm doing to think about how can children's media be a mechanism where some of this is delivered in ways that are very child friendly and understandable for the child. But also, you look at something like Sesame Street, Daniel Tiger, Bluey, these kinds of things. There is parenting curriculum that is coming through, and there are early childhood experts that are helping to develop that content, and it's based on research, but it's things that parents can use every day, whether it's the song or whether it's, wow, I saw how Mama Tiger broke that down and that was really great, and I'm gonna use that with my human child. And so I was like, oh, this is such a cool way to get some of this content out and very accessible to be understood by children and used by their caregivers. Excited to partner. I've been partnering with an organization called Wimee. This is right here in Grand Rapids. Michael Hyacinth is the founder of this company. He works with Kevin Conrad, Stephanie Conrad a lot. And Kevin's a master puppeteer. Stephanie has education and book background. But they have been creating this robot character and developing it in multiple different kind of iterations. It started as a live puppet-based show. It's on our local PBS. There's books now. But what I've had the pleasure of doing with them is helping on a piloted animation series with this robot called Wimee's World. And we had funding from the Kellogg Foundation, partnership with the Children's Museum, and in total we'll have 7 episodes. The very last one is in the storyboarding phase.
That's incredible.
But it's very focused on social emotional learning, but also diversity, equity, inclusion. And especially in the last 2 episodes, I was able to provide the initial synopsis for the storyline. The first one is going to be focused on discrimination and the second one on equity. And I remember going to a meeting with the Children's Museum, the animation company, and the staff at Wimee, and just saying, as everything was happening with this new administration, I was like, this episode that we're here to meet about is literally focused on equity. It's trying to operationalize that concept for 5 to 7-year-old children. Are you all still cool with that? Like, in this moment, when that's one of those words that's just, if you're putting that up, it's getting targeted and you are putting yourself at risk. And I was so encouraged that it was without hesitation. I was like, yes, this is who we are. This is what we stand by. The Children's Museum, Wimee, the animators, even Kellogg with their funding. And so I am so excited for these 2 episodes in particular. We just premiered the one that was about anti-discrimination. There's no humans in the world, in Wimee's world. It's animals, it's robots, it's things, but there's still ways where the messaging can be universal and applicable. And I've been able to create toolkits that are designed for caregivers that complement each episode with questions and extension activities and connections to help them to understand, what does discrimination mean? What does inclusion mean? We talk about how those most directly impacted need to be like the lead in defining solutions and really articulating the problem. That is a lot for a first grader to understand. But I developed the language to talk about the lead problem solver. Like, who gets to be the lead problem solver? And so I'm so excited about those episodes and the content that will go along with them, because it really is a direct manifestation of what I've been learning in my research to come through in this way. And honestly, Sesame Street is my big dream. I'm just like, if y'all are out there listening, PBS would be cool too. So I would love to continue these partnerships because it feels like a great way to have folks feel like, okay, I know this space. I feel comfortable. I know that it's a safe space that's very much about my child. And it's also a learning space. It's not just lights and colors and who knows what the plot is, but my child is coming. We have so much now about media, too much media exposure, too much screen time. But if you are going to have some, to have it be intentional. And I'm really excited for this partnership and what's to come to have this be an outlet for my work.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you. I'm like, yeah, and this is the direction you really wanna go further into, right? That's great that
I
Sesame Street is
do.
a dream. So yeah, if you all are out here listening, we got a great person here who's really ready, knowledgeable, and willing to do some incredible partnering. So I appreciate, and I also appreciate you naming, because I saw a connection too. I appreciate you naming the importance of the mirror window
Yeah.
experiences.
Mhm,
So the
mhm.
educator, the teacher, the family out there, oh, okay, my class is mostly white. What do we have? Why is this important to us? It's like you also need those window experiences to know it is not just us in this world. Going to be aware of
Right.
the existence and experiences and concerns of people who are different from you. So specifically the ones that you named though, it's yeah, there's some parenting
Yeah.
things in there
Yeah.
now. Some of this stuff is this more for the kids or is it for me?
Right.
Because I'm getting so much out of it. I'm getting so much out of it. Oh, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that thing so much better the next time I confront it because I
Mhm.
have something. Oh, emotionally just so many
Yes.
things that are important. So I just appreciate you making those connections because it's about the kids, but then it's also about the
Yes.
people who love them and care for them, who are raising them, who are in their lives.
So
How
much
can
more
we
likely to
even
be able to connect to that than we're parents especially. They're so busy. There's so much demand. Our social systems and safety nets are not designed to really support this incredible endeavor of raising children. So to ask them to be like, come to this webinar and come to it's just if you can get it into children's media content. And so they might be having a really fun, engaging watching an episode, eating some popcorn, or just what it just feels like that's something that can also be just responsive to the everyday demands of life. Not everybody's going to be able to go get a full degree in this. So how can it be bite-sized pieces and how can it come into everyday life in really usable ways? And that's something that I think about a lot.
just really appreciate you bringing that forward because I'm like, yeah, that resonated so much. Oh, some of the shows too. It's oh my goodness, just emotional, social emotional
Yeah.
learning, and there is intention too. It's not just because I hear the critiques and what you're saying too about like screen time and things. And there's a lot to say about that. Some show or lots of colors, rapid screen changes, and things that
Mhm.
folks are
Mhm.
saying about attention. But in the context of our conversation, though, we're talking about something a lot more intentional, educational, that, like you said, bite sized pieces too that caregivers can get. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
just really enjoyed and appreciate this conversation. Who are some of those people for you who have contributed to forming and shaping how you show up today, the way you're seeing the world, the way you're approaching your equity work? Who are some of those
Yeah.
people for you? People,
Yeah.
experiences, resources, but just who are some of those folks for you?
So for me, one of the first, I think the very first resource that really started me on my own personal journey of ethnic racial identity development, which is the first factor that I came to discover when it comes to the belief systems that are important. It was a book by a woman named Marita Golden, and it's called Don't Play in the Sun. And it was the first time that I had really been exposed to the concept of colorism and how it plays out in so many
Mm.
different cultures, but also it helped to illuminate for me how especially the way I was trying to physically present was very much connected to like the dominant culture, white standards of beauty, things like that. And it helped me to just start that journey. After reading that book was the first time I did what's referred to as the big chop. Like I had relaxed my hair for years. I didn't even know the natural texture of it anymore. And then to think about what that does for your children, those that are around you. And I would walk into the classrooms as an early childhood social worker, just being fully myself in that way. So that was an amazing book for me. More recently, Sisters of the Yam, I would say Bell Hooks is just one of the folks that speaks to me so deeply in terms of how I show up and how I engage in this work. I really appreciate over time how her work evolved and her writing to continue to reiterate how important it is to nourish ourselves, to find like our own joy, the rest, the relaxation, Audre Lorde as well, and that everything has to come from that. That is part of the resistance. That is part of the work to seek joy, to claim rest, to do all these things. And then like you're not giving of your entire being for the work because there's some ways that actually it's detrimental when we think about it in the long run. So those have been some things that have been really helpful to me. I just also read a book not that long ago by Dr. Lakshman. It was called Real Self-Care, and it really talks about self-care and connection to your values. So I think the subtitle is something like bubble baths and crystals not included. So not this consumerist, capitalist kind of idea, but what does it mean to get in touch with your values and then make your decisions about what you do for work, what you do for self, what you do for family, when we're living in alignment with our values. And that's how we really take care of ourselves. And it has to be a foundation if we're going to have the longevity and the sustainability to continue to contribute meaningful work in this culture, in these times specifically, and yeah, to those that we love and the work that we care about.
We are the people that we are, but we're also influenced by so many things. And so wanting to just take some time to name some of those things. I do have 3 question prompts that I ask everyone, and they can share as much or as little as they like to with any of the prompts, but it's a snapshot in time. I tell people too, like, it's if I were to ask you this 6 months or years from now, you might say something different, but
Sure.
just a way to engage in some thinking around this. And I don't know if you've seen, but what I'm doing is as a way to pull the voices of the multiple like storytellers together, I'm releasing these occasional episodes where it's just them all talking from
Oh, no,
their,
I'm not yet.
I call it the Justice We Imagine, and they're each answering these
Mm,
questions, and there's some powerful messaging when they come together. I really appreciate our individual conversations, but as I'm learning and like growing with this particular project, it's like, wouldn't it be
mhm.
cool to find more opportunities to bring all their voices together? So you are contributing to that
Yeah.
larger work of supporting others who listen to it and thinking about what their answers would be to these
Mhm.
questions. So the first prompt is, true social justice is possible when? It's like a finish the statement kind of thing. True
Yes,
social
yes.
justice is possible when?
True social justice is possible when there's mutual investment and accountability.
Okay. So it could be just like that, as much or as little as you want to say.
I think about it even with the concept of just like I am because you are, and that to me that, and I know you sign off with that.
Yeah.
Just so where it's like we're in this together. Like it's mutual. There's so many different ways and roles that we contribute, but there's mutual investment, and then there's this shared accountability. The idea of the intersected fates is just so powerful to me, and it doesn't allow really anybody to opt out or anybody to. There has to be that full awareness that nobody is immune or not connected in some way. That concept of injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I just believe that so much. My number one value is oneness. And I really think that's the approach that I bring to social justice work as well. We're all so connected. And so we all have to do the work together, and then we all experience the benefit together. And there has to be that accountability across everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very near and dear to my heart. I'm very moved by it too. Yeah, we're
Mhm.
all in it together, really. Second prompt is, my approach to social justice is shaped by.
My approach to social justice is shaped by our right to liberation. I just feel like that there is no hierarchy of human value, that liberation at every level and in every form not only is possible, but literally is our birthright. And to me, that's the driver of social justice work.
Mhm. Okay. And so the last prompt is, understanding and sharing our social justice origin stories is important because.
It connects us to our common humanity and helps us understand we're not alone.
We're not alone. And that's really a core message here. Hey, it's room enough. We're not alone. We need everybody out here. You're talking about ethnic, racial identity, socialization, and
Mhm,
early childhood
mhm.
development. Appreciate you sharing your contributions and what led you to that space here with us today. And there's lots of other folks. We need folks doing what I say in the series that I was talking to you about. I close it with, we need more folks doing what makes them come alive, doing the work that they
Yeah,
can do
yeah.
to bring about a more just world. We each might have different ways of doing that, but it's all a part of a larger whole to me, I think. So I appreciate you being here. There is one last question, and then I have another question here for you. So I guess there's 2 questions. But this is going to also be a part of a series too that I'll put people's voices together around. But honestly, underneath all of this, throughout it, a common thread is a recognition that I really do hope that our messages will outlast us, our
Yes.
storytelling, this
Mhm.
recording. I hope it outlasts us. And what I ask here is, for generations to come, many years from now, if you had an opportunity to share a message with them, what would you want them to know? What wisdom would you share with them? Or just what would you want to pass on to future generations? I'm hopeful that these words that we're sharing here now will echo far into the future. And just what would you want folks to know generations from now? What would you share to them?
Yeah, I feel like so much of my work is about investing in, upcoming generations and really entrusting that they'll be able to take so much of what we have learned through past generations, current generations, and just continue to improve on it. I think my message would just be to know that each and every one of you matter and have something to contribute, that as you are centered in yourself, that will really become clear. And I think also just recognizing that the collective is essential. I like the Mr. Rogers quote, look for the helpers.
Look for the helpers.
Look for the helpers, choose kind, and make sure that you're never forgetting where you came from, as well as how that interconnection to each other is so essential. When it comes to, I think, looking back and reflecting on life, those are the things, like what you contribute, what you left behind, who you were in connection to others is what really matters. And it's a gift. Leaning into this life is a gift, and taking what you can learn and sharing that, I think, is our collective responsibility and allows the richness of life to be fully felt and experienced.
Thank you. And this is actually the last question. This is it. And it's more of an informal kind of thing. But if you could put a title on the story that you told us today, if you could put a title on it, what would that be? And what I end up trying to do is trying to incorporate it into the title of the episode when it comes out.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like I've been almost like building out kind of the title of my life's journey for a long time. And it's come out for me personally in the expression of tattoos. And I think I would just combine a tattoo I got when I was 30 and then a tattoo that I just got between the end of last year and this year. And it would be Sankofa bird. That's what I would title it. When I first was introduced to the concept of Sankofa in general, but even very particular to this aspect of my life journey, it was so powerful. And you can see it. You can see it in the work. This idea of being able to go back and get what you didn't have, go back and reclaim what was stolen from you, go back and just reconsider the way that you were presented things, and that you have to have that to move forward in your future. That feels so close to what this work is. I have right here. This is like the bird right here. And then I have a much bigger piece that I just did right here that Robin represents the origin and then transforming into the blackbird here. And you can see too, like there's just a little bit of orange right here with like where we come from is always a part of us, but it doesn't have to be the full definition. And so much of what I'm doing now feels like an example of that Sankofa journey, to be reclaiming and then contributing to future generations.
Sankofa bird with Dr. Anissa L. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for, believing in this project and contributing, lending your voice to the narratives that we're gathering here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for all that you do.
All right. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and subscribe to Social Justice Origin Stories wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch video episodes on YouTube at Social Justice Origin Stories, and I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. Video episodes are also available on the project website, socialjusticeoriginstories.com. I'd love to hear about how you're engaging with the stories. Share your thoughts at socialjusticeoriginstories.com/contact or by emailing stories@socialjusticeoriginstories.com. To support the work of Social Justice Origin Stories, consider becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep this research going and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories to learn more and to make a contribution. Again, that's patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories. You can start or stop anytime. Social Justice Origin Stories is edited, hosted, and produced by me, Rolando Thompkins-Jones. Many thanks to our storyteller this week and the many storytellers who have contributed to this project. And thank you for joining me this week. Take care.